Williams, to the Dean of the School of Education, Dr. Lee, to the proud parents, grandparents, godparents, uncles and aunts and friends of this graduating class today, to family, but most importantly, to this talented class, the class of 2012 of the Joseph E. It is a very, very special honor for me to be here with you this morning. I'd like to speak briefly on the subject. It's a matter of principle. Principle is one of a few words in the English vocabulary that has a dual meaning. A quick search of Wikipedia or Google will show the first principle, which is spelled P-R-I-N-C-I-P-L-E, means a value, a law, a belief. And I call this a social principle. An example of this would be a document that was written in 1776, a document that my mother called the Corporate Mission Statement of America. You will recognize it as the Declaration of Independence. But it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is the social principle. But the second principle, which is spelled P-R-I-N-C-I-P-A-L, is an economic principle. A quick search of Google will show this statement made in 1926 by Calvin Coolidge, who was the 30th President of the United States. And he said very succinctly that the business of America is business. That is a social principle. And so to my young friends this morning, as you are about to begin on this journey, that increasingly this country and perhaps this world is divided less by social and gender, but now by economic classifications. And so my theory this morning, my thesis this morning is that we need to have an action plan. You need to have an action plan to make sure that you achieve both social and economic parity. That in this struggle for equality, dignity, egalitarianism, that we need to be focused on making this a level playing field for all Americans. So as our new leaders, our thought leaders, I challenge you this morning to have a personal action plan to make sure that you and we as a group achieve not only social parity, but also economic parity. And I'm sure you're asking, well, what should we do and how should we go about that? Well, I'm glad you asked. Because I did bring a very brief strategic action plan this morning that I'd like to share with you. This action plan was espoused by Josephine Dobbs Clement. And she called it the 3 B's. The book, the ballot, and the vote. The first B is the book. There is no more fundamental step in the direction of achieving social and economic parity than education. Education is always and will continue to be the gateway to success in this life. And I'd like to share with you a story that comes from the best all-time book on self-improvement, self-enhancement. It's a book called the Bible. If you turn to Matthew, the 25th verse, chapter 14, Matthew 25:14, you can read it when you get home. There's a story about a master who had 3 servants. And this master was about to go on an extended journey. And he called his servants in and said, to the first servant, I'm going to give you 5 talents. To the second servant, he said, I'm going to give you 2 talents. And to the third and final servant, he said, I'm going to give you 1. And after being away for an extended period of time, the master came back and he called his 3 servants together and wanted to know what had they done during the time that he was away. And the first servant said, Master, I took my 5 talents and I multiplied these. I now have 5 new talents. And the master says, well done. The second servant said, Master, you gave me 2 talents. And I went out and I multiplied and I picked up 2 new skills, 2 new talents. And the master says, well done. The third servant came forth and said, Master, I took my 1 talent and buried it. I didn't want to lose it. I didn't enhance my skills. I didn't try to improve my capabilities. And the master says, you wicked and lazy slave, I'm going to take your 1 talent and give it to the slave who had 10. The second B is the ballot. There is no fundamental blow for democracy, freedom, than the right to vote. All of you have heard stories about men and women who have given their lives for the right to vote. And it is incumbent upon you to exercise this right to vote and vote for responsible public elected officials. Public policy has a dramatic impact on all of us. Josephine Clement was a local elected official. My mother was an activist. She was a feminist. She was an intellectual. She was ahead of her time. But after raising 6 children, at the age of 51, she decided that she would go and run for public office. Superintendent, she ran for the Durham Board of Education. 2 terms later, she became the president and served for several terms until at age 63 that she decided to run for the Durham County Commission, where she won and served as a vice chair. And so the school is named in her honor because of her commitment and belief in public education. The third B is the buck. My mother grew up in a family of educators, activists, and also business people. And she knew firsthand the importance of a business class, an entrepreneur class in our community. And so I say to some of you today that as you think about your career choices, let's think about becoming employers and not employees. Think about becoming entrepreneurs and just not engineers, owners, just not operators, managers, just not mechanics. That this discussion, as we become more economically divided, should be a discussion, an economic discussion around capital formation and not capital punishment, around credit facilities and not correctional facilities, around IPOs and not DUIs. But we've got to be about the business of America, which is business. So in closing, if anyone should ask why we should be involved in social and economic empowerment, if anyone should ask why we're concerned about the 3 E's, the book, the ballot, and the vote, if anyone should ask you about social and economic parity, if anyone should ask you the difference between the 2 principles, if anyone should ask you tomorrow why we want to live the American dream, if anyone should ask you why we're concerned as Americans, that we too want to be treated with dignity and equality and respect, if anyone should ask you why we need to talk more about capital formation and less about capital punishment, if anyone should ask why we need to be employers and not employees. If anyone should ask me why we want to be judged on the contents of our character and not on the color of our skins, if anyone should ask me tomorrow about Josephine Dobbs Clement, if anyone should ask me why I came today and what I said, you can tell them that it's a matter of principle.